Hello everyone, Alcalter the SideQuest Gamer here, and today we are going to take a look at the lesser known NES game known as StarTropics. And it has a pretty big cult following, but is it worthy of its cult following? Well, let's check it out. StarTropics, the NES game that could. It was a pretty late release NES game that, despite being made in Japan, was localized only in America in 1991. Japan never saw it, and Europe only saw a virtual console release in 2007. Many people called it too similar to the first Legend of Zelda games, also for the NES. And I can say that it does definitely take a lot of inspiration from the first Zelda game, but I'm not saying that as a criticism. In fact, I'm actually saying that as a compliment. In fact, the first 2 hours of my play session with StarTropics, hopping on tiles, interacting with villagers, and killing the first 2 bosses, something strange happened that I never thought would have happened when going into this game. I'm going to say it. I like this game a lot more than the original Zelda. Wait, before you hit that dislike button, let me explain. I first heard of this game from the eShop, but I didn't want to risk $5, so I initially overlooked this game. Then 2 years later, I got into YouTube and watched the Wii Viewer and the Happy Video Game Nerd. Happy Video Game Nerd said that this game was one of his favorite games of all time, while Wii Viewer said initially that it was a Zelda ripoff and that he didn't really like it. Now, the Wii Viewer did retract the ripoff statement in his revisit of StarTropics. Now, fast forward to the summer of this year. For those of you who do think that this is a Zelda ripoff, let me tell you that this game was actually developed and published by Nintendo themselves. I will say that this game is a Zelda clone, but it has way more original content than borrowed content because A, unlike the first Zelda, hidden treasures are not a means of progression, as holdable power-ups in the dungeons are only as a means to make bosses and enemies easier to fight, but they're completely optional, unlike the first Zelda. B, this game is very linear, which may turn off fans of the original Zelda, but honestly, I like this change because I felt the first Zelda was way too non-linear to the point that it required a guide in order to find some of the dungeons, if you didn't want to spend countless hours experimenting with power-ups on every pixel of the game. And C, this game mainly focuses on the tile jumping mechanic to reveal platforms and switches to progress further into a dungeon, which Zelda never really had. The story involves our hero, Mike Jones, taking a helicopter to the Sea Islands to visit his uncle, Dr. Jones, but apparently Dr. Jones was kidnapped by an evil force that only a few villagers know about, but are too afraid to reveal its name. And throughout the whole game, you kind of feel its presence from afar. I mean, in the beginning of the 3rd chapter, it's so convenient for all of a sudden, Mike's submarine gets caught in a storm on a perfectly sunny day, might I add. And of course it gets shipwrecked. In fact, this evil force controls the many enemies in this game's 8 dungeons, but before you enter these dungeons, you usually have to do a quest for a few villagers in order to trigger the entrance to the dungeon to open, which is usually people blocking off the entrance. Like in Coca-Cola, for example, to gain access to the first dungeon, you have to talk to all of the villagers, and let me tell you, 70% of them say things that are not exactly relevant to the plot. In fact, many of the villagers are pretty useless. And that is one of the few minor annoyances I have with this game, but it's not too much of a hindrance to the fun I had with the game. The many villages in this island will either have the villagers or a creature that's sentient, like a dolphin for example, have you go into a dungeon to retrieve or rescue someone or something. Or maybe that dungeon is blocking that destination, and in order to reach that destination, you have to go through that dungeon. Either way, the game's story, as lighthearted as it is, does a pretty good job giving you a specific reason to journey into the 8 treacherous dungeons. And to me personally, that's a lot better than the Triforce of Wisdom has been divided into 8 pieces. Go find them. Now, I've been talking a lot about the dungeons in this review. They're pretty straightforward and a lot easier to navigate than even the Zelda dungeons. Each dungeon has many green tiles laid out that can be used as platforms. Step on the correct tile and you'll be rewarded with a switch to open a door so you can progress further or even unlock a secret passage to a room with a red potion. There's even instances where stepping on a tile that is entirely optional would reward you with health pickups that you probably need. The bosses themselves are either really easy or really hard. As in every dungeon, there are menu items that you can pick up like baseball bats, torches, or a snowman. But using these limited items might make enemies easier to defeat than the yo-yo itself. Oh, by the way, instead of a sword, did I mention that you're actually equipped with a deadly yo-yo? You may think that's poppycock, but since Mike Jones is an ace pitcher, he can throw the base of the yo-yo at high velocities, fracturing the skulls of enemies. But anyways, the limited equipable items like the snowman could make bosses like the octopus a real pushover, but if you say you died past a checkpoint that blocks access from that item, or just forget to pick up the limited item completely, the boss would be a lot harder but still beatable. Now, as for difficulty, this game is a bit challenging but a lot easier than the original Legend of Zelda. One of the main reasons I like this game over the original Zelda is because if you died in a dungeon in the original Zelda, you had to start at the beginning if you chose continue. But in StarTropics, if you died in the dungeon, you have 2 more lives, and if you reached a checkpoint, you would start there instead of the beginning of the dungeon. While the game isn't holding your hand, it's not exactly being unreasonable either, which I really can't say the same for the original Zelda, as there's instances of cheap deaths like with the Battle of Wizrobes in that one dungeon. The game graphically is a mixed bag for me. The overworld's graphics are kind of bland, especially for a late NES game, but in the dungeons, the graphics are really good. I will say that the game is graphically and aesthetically more appealing than the original Zelda. But as for the music in this game, it's decent. I can only remember the dungeon theme off the top of my head, and that's really the one thing that the first Zelda does a lot better than StarTropics, as the Hyrule theme and the dungeon theme are trapped in the hearts of many gamers like me, while the StarTropics soundtrack is just nothing worth remixing except the dungeon theme, and the boss theme, I will admit, makes me alert when fighting the game's many bosses. So overall, I like StarTropics a lot more than the original Zelda. Not that the first Zelda was bad or anything, it's still a really good game, but StarTropics just hit me in the right places in terms of gameplay and aesthetics. And I know some will disagree, but out of the 2 top-down action RPGs on the NES, StarTropics would be the game I'd replay more often than the original Zelda. So overall, StarTropics would get my overall rating of a 96 out of 100. It is currently my second favorite NES game of all time, with number 1 being only Super Mario Bros. 3. StarTropics has still held up pretty well, although the controls will take a little getting used to since Mike controls exactly like Link in the original Zelda. And the graphics aren't the best on the NES, but this game has aged moderately. Loose cartridges are only going for $8, which is criminally underpriced, and $15 cheaper than buying the original Zelda Gold Cart. This game did get a sequel called Zoda's Revenge, and I honestly haven't played that yet, but I'll get to that eventually, probably either this November or December. Comment question: what do you like better, StarTropics or the original Zelda? Now keep in mind, this is your personal opinion, and there is no right answer, so please leave me your thoughts in the comment section below. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and remember to stay awesome. Hello everyone, if you've reached this point in the video, thank you so much for sticking with me this long. Now, this is kind of an October update, as I'm going to be reviewing games that are Halloween themed, kind of not. It's gotta at least be creepy or have some scary elements, even if it's lighthearted in terms of creepiness. So, next week, I'm going to review Doom 2 Hell on Earth for the PC. Viewer discretion advised, children. Yeah, I don't want your parents catching you watching bloody gameplay of a very old game. I don't want to get you grounded. But yeah, that's the game plan, so please tune in those few weeks in this October. Again, thank you so much for watching. Take care.